Alright, you lot, welcome back. We've got another reveal to check out this fine Monday, and this one is one of those ones that falls like fully into the category of this is something that needed to happen. It might not be the most exciting thing in the world, but it is something that needed to happen because today we've got the Space Marine Captain on bike, which, to be fair, straight off the bat, perfectly good, perfectly serviceable. It's maybe not setting the world on fire, it's maybe not the most inspiring and influential of model reveals, but it is something that did need to happen, because for a while now, you've only had the Chaplain on bike, which is an interesting way to do things when there are a good couple of chapters out there that really kind of benefit from having a captain on bike. I mean, I'm looking specifically at the Dark Angels and the White Scars in particular. Yes, they do have their own named characters in both cases, but one of them is kind of getting on a bit, and when it comes to running a force, you don't necessarily, at least not everyone necessarily, wants to put a named character in that force. Some people, myself included, are perfectly happy just having an unnamed lad that you can kit bash the living hell out of, which this is one of them. Yeah, I think it looks more visually interesting than the more plain bikes, which obviously makes sense with it being a captain. The only thing is, I think I would have liked more, just more in general, which is something that I'm finding increasingly when it comes to Space Marine characters, which I'm perfectly happy to confess there is a level of hypocrisy there, because we've talked before about Games Workshop like over-designing miniatures, packing way too much stuff on, making them kind of hard to read and a bit of a mess from a distance, you know, making it so the silhouette is just a blob of something instead of something identifiable. We've talked about many times before, the Death Guard is kind of a culprit for this on some of their models, not all of them, but some of them. That being said, when it comes to a larger model like this, I feel like you can get away with just a little bit more and it wouldn't become too much. So for instance, I do like the wings on the side. That is kind of cool, and having the little eagle's face there. However, I don't think it would have added too much to have made the wings a bit more obvious, a bit more, well, just bigger, really. A bit more bigger, that's not a proper sentence. It would have in fact looked a little bit better. And that's just one of those things where the bike itself is pretty bulky. There is a decent amount of real estate on it, and yes, you don't want to completely overwhelm it with a load of additional stuff, but the stuff that's on there could stand to be just that little bit more noticeable, and I think it would hold up perfectly well. I don't think it would really mess anything up on that specific shape, at least. It also kind of looks, from this angle at least, like the front has got a bit of added detail, but the back is relatively plain. Now, scrolling down a bit, we don't get a perfect angle of both sides of the back, but from what I can see, this is kind of like front loaded in terms of the extra stuff to denote that it's a bike for a special lad, which is fine, but there's like real estate at the back. There are things that could be done to make that slightly more interesting and just a little bit different to the standard bikes that, again, they haven't really taken advantage of. Now, when it comes to the captain himself, I quite like it. There is a cloak. I have seen a comment already where someone was like, a cloak's a good idea on bikes with spinning wheels that they could potentially get caught up in. I mean, the answer is obviously no, it's not a good idea. It's arguably a very bad idea, but cloaks are cool, and as such, he gets a cloak. That's how that works. It's fine. The bike itself hardly makes a huge amount of sense by itself, so worrying about whether the cloak is going to get caught up in the wheel, front or rear, I mean, it's not high on my list of priorities, considering that the underside of the bike is essentially flat to the floor on this one, at least. I just don't care. It's just like, there are things to pull them up on, and then there's stuff that you can just rule of cool away. That's why I still love Lehman Russ tanks. I mean, this is perfectly fine. The actual captain, again, we've got the tilt shield. That's excellent. Love seeing one of those. I do like the ornament on the power pack. That looks great. The power sword looks decent. There is a loadout that does not work on this one, though. And the loadout that does not work is that Thunderhammer. And it doesn't work primarily because it looks as though the captain is looking at said Thunderhammer as though it should not be there. Like, I know that's not actually what he's doing. It's just the fact that you've got the helmet. Plus, I think, given that this guy goes together in a sensible way, you should hopefully be able to repose the head. It is a little bit I say that, I've just noticed every head is positioned the same way. Surely not. Surely the head does not have a specific, way it slots in, forcing you to have him look off to the right. They're not doing that, are they? They can't be. Please say they're not doing that. But provided you can rotate the head, and I'm sure you could with a bit of effort anyway, just cut a few bits off, turn it, you're good. That makes it fine. But in the default pose, it does sort of look like he's kind of glaring at the Thunderhammer in a, what is this in my hand sort of way. I'm sure it would be absolutely fine if you turn the head slightly to the left, so it's either straight on or even looking the other way. Just something a little bit to take away from the nonplussed looking at the weapon he's holding in his hand. This is all fine. This is all decent. It's all okay. There is nothing particularly standout. There's nothing particularly exciting, but it does fulfill the niche that has so far been missing from the Space Marines. And as such, we're all good. If anything, this does highlight to me, though, that I have definitely fallen into a pattern. I've definitely fallen into something whereby I'm just not getting the kick that I used to get from certain aspects of the Games Workshop release schedule, which is something that we are going to talk about in a moment. Although I do have a small question. How much fuel do you reckon one of those bikes takes? How much fuel do you reckon it takes? I reckon it takes a good amount. I mean, I think it makes sense to me that that would be quite the thirsty vehicle. Speaking of which, so stupid. I want to talk to you about Holy. Now, you've heard me talk about Holy before. That's because I drink it constantly, all the time. I started drinking Holy as a way to cut myself off from as many fizzy drinks as I was having before. Fizzy drinks is such a, child's way of saying that. There is an exception to this. See, in here I've got passion fruit. That is my favourite hydration flavour. They do hydration, they do energy, they do iced tea, they do milkshakes. Passion fruit is my favourite. However, I said last time that green apple is quite nice as well. That is true, but there is a secret to green apple that they are not telling you. Holy won't tell you this, but I'm going to tell you this. Green apple mixed with sparkling water is absolutely delicious. Primarily because there is a fizzy beverage that is quite well known for tasting of apple, and I'm telling you right now, it tastes almost identical. And the nice thing is that that particular fizzy beverage is quite expensive. But one scoop of green apple is less than £1. It's also less than 20 kcal per serving as well, and there's zero added sugar. So it's healthier and it's cheaper. And it's delicious. I mean, really, what more could you want? Now, if you want to check out Holy, I recommend picking up the Starter Set Deluxe. You will get a shaker, you will get a bunch of different flavours of the different lines, the energy, hydration, iced tea, and milkshake, and you get to find out which is your favourite, and then you can buy a tub of it and absolutely demolish said tub, like I've been doing with the passion fruit and the blueberry over the last couple of months. To try Holy, check out the link in the description and the pinned comment down below. Use code KIRIOTH5 for £5 off your first order, and then use code KIRIOTH for 10% off your orders after that. Thanks, Holy. Now let's get back to talking about Space Marines. So here's the thing, right? When it comes to Space Marines, I've discovered that I don't think I'm bored of Space Marines as a whole. I still get excited for range refreshes when it comes to things like the Space Wolves. Absolutely fantastic. When the Dark Angels got a big update, I really enjoyed that. When it comes to character updates, it always feels like there's some form of evolution. There's something that changes that makes it a bit more interesting, a bit more exciting than it was before, even when it's just a case of taking an established character, scaling them up, and just improving the overall quality of the sculpt. I'm talking in terms of lines, edges, all of the sharp crispness that you get from the newer Games Workshop stuff. I tried to say crispness. I think I said Christmas. That's not what I meant. I did not mean that they're adding extra, figgy pudding to new miniatures. No. Anyway, the problem that I think I'm having is that when it comes to the generic Space Marine sculpts, it feels like there's more that could be done, but obviously they don't want to because then it steers them more towards one chapter or another. So a good example being things like the Space Marine Captain on bike right here. He is perfectly fine. He's perfectly good. That is a decent Captain model. When it comes to the actual quality of it, when it comes to the amount of ornamentation, the ornamentation that's been applied, I don't mind any of it. I think it looks fine. It looks on par with every other captain / lieutenant that they've shown off. But they've shown off a few different variants and versions of those different captains and lieutenants, and so it feels like seeing the same thing again but reposed. Now, of course, when it comes to things that are, you can really make different, on this model, the thing that you can really make different is the bike. Now, a good example of this is the Chaplain on bike. So the Chaplain on bike, I really like this model, even though the bike isn't all that much more like ornamented than the captains, but it's less about how much space has been covered up and what they've done with the space that they've used. So yes, we don't have the wings down the side, but we do have the skull with the star around it, which looks fantastic. We've got a bit of decoration at the back as well, with some skulls going on. But the big change to this bike is, of course, the massive book chained to the top of it. Now, even if this wasn't a chaplain riding this bike, just that modification and the sheer scale of it compared to the vehicle it's on, it kind of evokes something quite specific. I really like this because it feels like it's using the space super well, right? When you look at the normal bikes, the normal Outriders, you do have these big sections of blank canvas. The top of the bike is one, the rear is another, the sides are another. And for my money, that Chaplain does a lot more with the space that is provided for customization, to make him stand out, to make him really notable as something different, not just another Outrider. Yes, it is just one book with some chains, it is just a couple of symbols, but that to me has a bigger visual impact than putting a couple of wings on the side. And whilst the wings look good, and we do have some purity seals as well, the overall impact for me just isn't as good. It's not as cool. It doesn't read in a similar way. I don't look at that and go, that is something really special. That to me, weirdly, especially with the little eagle head on front, especially with the little eagle head at the front, that reads more like an afterthought than simply chaining a book to the top of the bike. Now, that shouldn't be the case. This should be something that it looks like was done in about 30 seconds as they're about to be dropped off to go into the fight, because it's just a book that's chained to the top of the bike. But there's like a purpose to it. There is a sort of very clear and obvious symbology to it. That's not a real word, but you know what I mean. Whereas that just kind of, I don't know, it feels small, it feels weedy, it feels like, what do we do to denote that this bike belongs to someone important? Well, it's a captain, so it needs some sort of aquila or eagle. Okay, where do we put it? Well, wings on the side, the face goes on the front. That's it, done. Also, just a small thing, from this angle at least, it looks like the guns barely clear the head, which is bugging me the more I look at it. That doesn't feel significant enough. It feels like it could be more in your face, it could be more clear, it could be more interesting. Like, just having that little bit of decoration perched on top of that front, wheel cover, okay, fine, but why isn't something more interesting being done with that entire front assembly? Like, when you look at Samael, for instance, that is a big old, essentially, crow on the front of his jet bike, and yeah, I know that the other one isn't a jet bike, but they clearly have the kind of ideas that lead to having a full-on eagle at the front, covering the front of it. Why isn't that sort of thing applicable to this? When it comes to something that is driven by someone of notable rank, something that is a bit more enclosed, a bit more in your face, the thing that I think still makes the more specific chapter updates more interesting to me is that it feels like they're forced to think about what they do with them that little bit more. Or at least they should do. We have to acknowledge the fact that the Blood Angels failed miserably on that front. That's not the Blood Angels' fault, obviously. But when it comes to things like the Space Wolves, things like the Dark Angels, I'm picking those as being really specific examples of working super well, because they actually used the, the chapter trappings to do something that both fit the Primaris model and also made it seem like it was actually relevant to the chapter itself. I mean, when we look at the Raven Guard characters as well, they absolutely nailed both of the ones that we've got currently, and that's because they didn't sit there and go, well, do we want the guy with the jump pack to have a bunch of, parchments and ribbons hanging off him? Because that's not practical. Instead, they went, yes, let's make this the most moody and sort of statuesque model we could possibly get away with. And as a result, it looks cool as hell. And then contrast that with having to do something more generic, and you get things like this, which is fine. It's fine, and it works, but it's simply not exciting. It just kind of is. Now, I don't think there's a particular solution to that when it comes to just generic Space Marines. That is a personal thing. That is a subjective thing. That is I'm just kind of fed up of your mainline standard Space Marines. I don't know what Games Workshop could do to fix that necessarily. Maybe that's just a symptom of, being around the hobby for a significant amount of time that is manifested in a particular way for me, but it's kind of, in a way, feels like a bit of a shame, because I don't want to end up sitting here and going, you know what, I just don't care for it, when there's actually nothing wrong with it. Even though, taste in models is entirely subjective, I also want to, keep talking about the things that are relevant in the hobby, and this stuff is relevant not just to me. It's not aimed at me, because I don't have a Space Marine army currently. Or at least I do, but it's all Firstborn stuff and Terminators, which this doesn't really fit into. But I don't know. I think that's kind of where I'm at when it comes to the generic Space Marine stuff in general at this stage. When it comes to the chapter specific, I find it super interesting. I find it super fun. But less and less I'm finding myself impressed by the models that are supposed to apply to everyone. And I think it's because they are heavily constrained. They have to be more conservative. They have to have certain lines and certain aspects to them that can't be confused for something else, because they need to apply to everyone else. And that is, to be fair, kind of a difficult thing to navigate, I think. I think it's a case of not overselling certain details. You have to make that a bit of a priority. Otherwise, you could end up with something that would simply look like it belonged to one group instead of all of them. So, in that respect, I can't sit here and go, this is bad. But at the same time, it doesn't have a huge amount of flair, and it doesn't feel like it has a huge amount of imagination, and so it's not getting that kind of excited response that I would quite like to have when a new miniature is shown off. That was extremely rambly. I hope at least some of that made sense. Let me know what you think of that, lad, and in fact, the whole thing in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to Holy, and again, check them out using the link in the description and the pinned comment. I'll see you for the next one.